for, and you know what it is? It's yet another tax on the hard-working people of Connecticut. We can put it in a lockbox, you can call it whatever you want, but when they need it, they rate it out of the general fund and they use it for whatever they want. Ladies and gentlemen, enough is enough. How many taxes are we going to put on people? We have 300 taxes and fees on the people in Connecticut. And the answer is, let's just add one more and suddenly we'll get a different answer. Ned Lamont will be Dan Malloy version 2.0. You're going to have taxes coming out of your ears. How long are we going to put up with 8 years of destructive economic policy? It's time for a change. Yes, it is time to be honest. We've got a crisis in this state, and you know why we have a crisis? Because we're taxing people to the point where they're leaving at 80 per day. And unless we turn that around, and unless we show some leadership, and unless we do a 180-degree turn on the economic policy from the last 8 years, we're not going to get it done. I'm going to do it. We're going to do it together. We're going to get it done quickly, and we're going to turn around the state of Connecticut.
Mr. Stefanowski, thank you. Mr. Lamont, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
Bob is just making it up. He's just making it up. If he had a plan of his own, he had a strategy, he had a way he could cut spending, if he had a plan to get this state moving again, if he had a way to create jobs, he'd be talking about his plan and his ideas rather than constantly attacking me. And that's just no way to get this state moving. That's no way to get people together, no way to make this happen. Look, I'm going to be tough as nails when it comes to what we got to do on the spending side. I will prioritize what we've got to do. But the question was about transportation. Let's get back actually to the question. You know, we just opened up a rail line from New Haven up to Springfield. It takes about 2,000 cars a day off the road. 2,000 people taking this. These are the type of investments we need to get this state moving again. Ask us for some specific ideas on how you get this job going again, how we get this state moving again, and please dismiss all the cheap attacks.
Mr. Lamont, thank you. Our next question is directed toward Mr. Griebel.
Thank you for remembering my name, Dennis.
And it's from Christopher.
Mr. Griebel, in the audience tonight are UConn students,
yes,
many of whom will prepare to enter the workforce when they graduate in the spring. Like many millennials, they will be seeking job and social opportunities in cosmopolitan cities. So what 3 things will you do to improve Connecticut so these Huskies and other millennials across the state will want to stay in Connecticut?
2 things. One is this is a growth challenge. No net job growth in 30 years, as I said in the answer to the first question, puts us in this problem. The biggest challenge we're facing in Connecticut right now is a crisis of confidence. A crisis of confidence in residents and a crisis of confidence in employers. So one of the things we'll do is make sure that acting as the Chief Marketing Officer, we're talking to the employers who are here today to make sure that the jobs they have here stay here, that we convince them we're able to get rid of some of the low-hanging fruit and eliminating regulations and mandates to make it more job-friendly and more growth-friendly. We'll talk about partnering up with higher education, our vocational schools, more closely with the employers. So just give you a quick example over an electric boat. They're hiring 15,000 to 16,000 engineers here over the next couple of years with a submarine contract. Westerly, the community college in Westerly, Rhode Island, is referred to as EB University because they've taken their curriculum and married that more closely with what EB wants. Most of you in this room are pursuing a traditional undergraduate degree, which is great. That's where you want to be. We need to make sure that our insurance companies, our health employers here, hospitals, and those who provide health care across the board, that our R&D capacity in places like Jackson Labs and at UConn, at Yale, are growing, that this is a place where those jobs are going to be. The goal of getting 200,000 more jobs in this state is to give us the revenue to invest in education, invest in transportation, and restore Connecticut to its preeminence on a national level where it's been for most of its history. And the way we're going to do that is through jobs and keeping people like you here. You are the future of Connecticut. Your votes matter in many ways more today than they ever have before because you're going to own the vote, the result of that vote, in a way that those of us who are older won't. So the partnership and the commitment to younger people here is absolutely critical.
Mr. Stefanowski, 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I graduated from a school down the road, Fairfield University, in 1984. I was working at Hartford in the Gold Building with Price Waterhouse within 90 days. I met my wife, Amy, there. We bought a house. We took out a mortgage. We raised a family. We had a terrific life and career in the state of Connecticut. Dan Malloy and his economic policies have ruined that. Connecticut is the only state in the entire nation that has not recovered the jobs from the Great Recession. And you know why? I'm going to sound like a broken record, ladies and gentlemen, but fundamentally flawed economic policies. How do you attract business and jobs to a state where your where your corporate tax rate is higher than your neighbors, where your roads and bridges are the fourth worst in the nation? We need to get this economy moving. We need to have housing prices start to turn around. The last debate was at the realtors. Housing prices in Fairfield County are down 17%. It starts with the economy, and we can't continue to do more of the same. We need to have vibrant cities. I can remember going out in 1984, the Hartford Whalers. You probably don't remember them. They had the best logo in the entire NHL, a whale. I still have the shirt. It's older than my kids. You could go out at night, you could go to a Whalers game, you could go to restaurants, and you know what did that? Economic development. Low taxes, people wanted to be here. Good roads and bridges. The best thing we can do for the young people of Connecticut is get this economy moving, allow you to invest in a home if you want to. Many kids today don't want a home, that's fine, but start to appreciate some value in a home, have a great investment, have vibrant cities, have a job, and have some hope for the future. People in Connecticut right now are losing hope. His economic policy is going to continue it. We need a change. We need a change to bring hope back to the young people of Connecticut. I'm going to deliver it. Ned Lamont is not.
Thank you, Mr. Stefanowski. Mr. Lamont, you have 2 minutes.
Chris, thank you for that question. That's the question I heard from everybody at the Student Center. And when Annie and I moved to Connecticut 35 years ago, we knew we'd hit the jackpot. We knew this was an amazing state, a great quality of life, good job opportunities, cities that were sort of funky, and values that we respected of independence and integrity and the self-reliance and working together. And Connecticut still has that, but we've been let down, as Oz would say, by a generation of political leaders on both sides of the aisle. You know, I can say that Bob's got the exact same tax scheme as John Rowland, and where did that get us? But why have the debate about where we've been? The question is, what are we going to do going forward? And I think the first thing I learned is we're going to have to get this state moving again. We're going to have to make this a place where our kids want to be. And you can't do that by cutting $12 billion out of the budget. You can't do that by gutting education, gutting K through 12. These are the reasons we want to stay in Connecticut. This is the reasons why we want to raise our family in Connecticut. You can cut taxes for the millionaires. You know what that would mean? That just means pushing all those expenses down onto our towns and cities. That means pushing the expenses on to folks like you. You'll see that reflected in your tuition. You'll see that reflected in the cost of education. You'll see that at CCSU, not just UConn, CCSU where I'm a teacher. You'll see that reflected in terms of property tax, the property tax that your family is paying right now. That's the biggest tax paid by the middle class. That's the tax that I'm going to cut. That's the tax that lets young people stay in the state. And I'd be the first guy who started a business in this state. I'll be working every day, hand in glove, with small business and big business, making sure that all the skills that each of you have learned in UConn and these other places are matched up with the jobs we have going begging right now. These are great jobs. They're going to be for Connecticut families, each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamont. Mr. Griebel, you have 1 minute of review.
2 things. Thanks, Dennis. One is I think what the university did under President Herbst's leadership of moving the West Hartford campus to downtown Hartford is an example of partnering up tighter. The expansion of the Stanford campus, putting you closer to prospective employers is a great idea. And the other thing that governor has to do in being the chief marketing officer is making sure that employers know how much talent is in this state now. The GE move allegedly to go up because they wanted digital talent and they had to go to Boston or Atlanta. I don't believe we did a good enough job in explaining to them the talent that exists here in Connecticut, at UConn and at Yale and at the other schools. Part of this is making sure we close the gap between people working in the silos on the employer side and people in higher education and the education side. Closing that gap, bringing people together is what the Griebel-Frank administration will be all about.
Thank you, gentlemen. Our next question goes to Mr. Stefanowski and comes from Emily.
Mr. Stefanowski, on his first day as governor in 2011, Daniel Malloy issued an executive order requiring the adoption of generally accepted accounting principles. What would be your first executive order if elected?
Well, I'm a CPA and I love GAAP, but I'm not sure that would be my top priority my first day in office. But I do have to, and I'll answer that, I do have to comment on something Ned said. He said we can't focus on where we've been. You know the problem, ladies and gentlemen, we've been going like this. And Ned Lamont's economic policy is going to continue us in the exact same direction because it is no different whatsoever than where we've been. That's exactly the problem. We can't keep going the way we've been going. That's why I keep focusing on it. His economic policy is identical to Dan Malloy. I don't know if he asked for GAAP or not, but absent that, his economic policy is identical. That's why we need change. And I got to believe, I'll talk about GAAP just for a second, I'm sure it's infinitely worse in Hartford than we even know because we're not on that basis. But again, what am I going to focus on? The economy, taxes, regulation, getting the economy moving. We lost, during Dan Malloy's administration, the state of Connecticut grew a lot slower than the national economy. Had we grown at the same level, just the same level as the national economy, we would have had $30 billion more of gross annual product. That would have delivered another $12 billion of taxes.
What would your first executive order be, though?
A state of emergency, as I said before, a state of emergency. We'll deal with Hartford. We'll deal with a lot of other crazy spending, Dennis. We'll get taxes down. We'll get this economy moving. My executive order is to reverse exactly what Dan Malloy's been doing for the last 8 years. And he's going to continue it. Economy, taxes, money in people's pockets, invest in education. That's what we're going to move forward with.
Mr. Lamont, you have 2 minutes. What would your first executive order be?
Let me just respond for a second. 2 of us here on this stage actually took on Dan Malloy in 2010. 2 of us thought that we had to make the structural changes we needed to get this state moving again. 2 of us wanted to make fundamental changes in terms of where we are. That was Oz and myself. Bob wasn't there. I don't know where Bob was. He didn't bother to vote. 2010, 2014. I stood up and I challenged. And by the way, I've stood up to my party before. I had another race some years earlier where I thought we were wrong in the war in Iraq. I stood up and challenged my own party. Frankly, this is sort of a unique opportunity for me. I've only run against Democrats. This time I have a chance to run against not 1, but 2 Republicans. You know, Oz is sort of a traditional Connecticut Republican, and Bob is more of a Trump Republican. And I'm ready to go in there and take on anybody and stand up and challenge the way we've been doing business every day.
Hold your applause till later. Please hold your applause till later.
I don't have executive orders. I'll tell you the first thing I would do, Dennis. I would say, all right, here we go. Labor, let's come into the room. Business, I need you at the table as well. You know, there's an ad out by Bob that says, Ned's saying everybody's going to have to do a little bit more. You're right. Everybody's going to have to do a little bit more. Labor's going to be at the table. Business is going to be at the table. Republicans and Democrats, small business, small towns, we're going to have to learn the shared services. I'm going to get these folks together. I have to put together a budget within 4 months. I have to make sure it's an honest budget. And it's not going to be a $4.5 billion deficit if I get it solved in that year 1. That was the biggest mistake Dan Malloy made. He didn't get that solved in year 1. GAAP or no GAAP, you've got to solve it. You've got to deal with the structural crisis we have. You need somebody who can work with respect with labor and business. That would be my job 1.
Mr. Lamont, thank you. Mr. Griebel, 2 minutes.
So 2 things. One, just for the audience. Ned is running against a Republican and an independent candidate for governor. Let me be really sure.
Please hold your applause.
There's
please.
1 Republican up here, not 2. The second thing, the question, you've got to start this process, Dennis, on November 7th. So the executive order, the idea of putting a transition team together, getting the best and brightest starts on November 7th. We're campaigning today to win on November 6th. The campaign to change Connecticut along the lines we're talking about here starts on November 7th. I'll give you a couple of quick executive orders. I would reestablish a Transportation Strategy Board right away. I would start the process of going to the federal government to get the authority we need to get the tolls in. I would go to the Highway Department to see if we could put that idea of putting tolls on the HOV lanes. I would focus on transportation right away. Instead of yapping and yapping and yapping about it, let's get something moving in that direction. That's where we want to go. And I want to come back to the transportation thing in one area. You know, under the pay me now, pay me later issue, we took in 1999 under Governor Rowland, we took 15 cents out of the gasoline tax. At that time, each penny represented $15 million. 15 times 15 is $225 million. times 20 years is $5 billion. Nobody likes the gasoline tax. But we're now in a situation where we underfunded our transportation infrastructure, where we're having these asinine fights where Republicans can't support a toll and the Democrat has to be supported regardless. This notion is not about tolls or costs. It's making sure that you understand that the dollars you pay in the gasoline tax or tolls or your income tax are going into the services that you want. That's what this issue is about. So yes, do I believe we need to invest in transportation? Absolutely. And that would be one example of some of the executive orders I would start with.
Thank you, Mr. Griebel. Mrs. Stefanowski, you have 1 minute of rebuttal.
So, you know, Ned's going to try to hide behind Oz all night. And just for one clarification, I have the endorsement of the Independent Party of Connecticut, as well as the Republican Party. But listen to what Ned just said. He said on tape, everyone's going to have to do a little bit more. What does that sound like to you? Everyone's going to be taxed more. Because he followed it up in that interview by saying that. He said it on radio. He said it on TV. Make no mistake about it. He is going to raise taxes on everyone in this state. And we need to do the exact opposite. I don't understand how you can say something 4 weeks ago and have a totally different position 4 weeks later. But ladies and gentlemen, I don't even worry about it anymore because I know the economic policy of Ned Lamont is going to be exactly what Dan Malloy did. We need to turn it around. The people of Connecticut are sick and tired of taxes. We don't need tolls. We can get rid of the state income tax over 8 years. We lived perfectly fine as a state before 1991. We were the fastest growing state in the entire nation. And you know why? Because we didn't have a state income tax.
Thank you. Our next question is from Chris, and it goes to Mr. Lamont.
Mr. Lamont, after years in the Big East, UConn now has to subsidize its athletic department to the tune of nearly $30 million a year. That's the third highest amount out of all Division I athletic programs. The football alone spends $8 million more than it brings in each year. What will you do the university into a premier conference and get those finances under control?
I'd love to see in the ACC. I think this is a big league place, and we ought to be playing with the big league teams everywhere we go. This is an amazing university, and I support the sports program you have here. I love the energy and passion that it brings. I love the pride that it brings to the state of Connecticut. Watching the women's basketball team win, that is so important to Connecticut, so important to who we are, and it sends a message wherever we can go. Look, I love this university. We cannot afford to cut back on UConn. This is our premier university. It's a top 25 public university, and we get tens of thousands of more applications, top 10% people. This means so much to this future. And I want each and every one of you here who come to Connecticut, come to UConn, many of you come from out of state. 10% of the freshman class is Chinese, Susan told me today. That's remarkable. Get some of those folks to stay here as well. Make sure that this is a state that they can call home, and make sure they can bring some business and bring some opportunities and bring some investments here. So look, that's one of the reasons where you can't cut $10 billion out of a budget that's already in deficit. That would be devastating to UConn. That would be devastating to our educational opportunities. Connecticut doesn't have oil, it doesn't have natural gas. We've always had the best trained, most productive, best educated workforce in the world. That's why we have advanced manufacturing here. That's why we have fintech. That's why we have insurance. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we have the same quality workforce going forward. Make sure each and every one of you know that there's going to be an amazing job waiting for you as soon as you graduate. And if you get to go to a couple of basketball games along the way and enjoy yourself, God bless you.
Mr. Griebel, you have 2 minutes. What would you do to try to get the university into a premier conference and get the finances of UConn under control?
2 things. I do want to make one other correction. Bob is the independent party endorsed candidate. 27,000 registered voters of the independent party, most of whom don't even know they're registered with the independent party. 63 showed up to vote. Bob beat me 40-14. So just I want to keep in context when we say we're an independent party candidate. On the conference, Dennis, I've had the privilege and the pleasure of playing and coaching at the intercollegiate level when I was a lot younger. I'm very concerned about that we've lost our way with interscholastic athletics. Over the last 30 years, this has been about money, and I understand the idea of getting into a conference. But the idea that taxpayers are going to subsidize a big-time athletic program, I have to tell you, I'm from Missouri. The idea that we have to have everything, I think there'd be a lot of people wish we never left the Big East. If those Big East rivalries were still here in basketball, you'd be putting fannies in the seats in the XL Center. You wouldn't have the travel budget that you have to go to Tulsa or other places in the AAC. And by the way, that's not a lot better in the ACC, given the fact that you've got to go down to Florida. We're putting a lot of the so-called minor sports of volleyball and soccer and baseball, I think, in a very precarious position, in the sense that all the travel time that those teams have to go. I know Jimmy Pender's here fairly well. I've got a lot of respect for him. I think he's one of the best coaches in the country. But the challenge that he faces in that when you have to squeeze all those games into about a 6-week session, 6-week period, puts a lot of strain on the student athlete. So I think there's a real question before I answer whether we get them into a big-time conference. Is that really what we want to do? I know that people start probably throwing tomatoes at me here, but the fact is, this is about students getting an education. And I'd say MIT, that's been a Division III school all of its life, pretty good place to put a marker against.
Mr. Griebel, thank you. Mr. Stefanowski, you have 2 minutes. What would you do to try to get the university into a premier conference and rein in the finances?
So education's critical. I mean, you should all be proud of this school. It's a terrific institution. It's a hallmark of Connecticut. My dad and mom, they didn't go to college. My dad worked at the Southern New England Telephone Company for 30 years. He was ran the scoreboard at the Yale Bowl for about 40 years, where I was an usher. I think I may have showed Ned to his seat one day for a 25-cent tip. But education's important. They valued education. I had one sister who went to Yale, one who went to Quinnipiac, one who went to Albertus Magnus, one who went to UConn, and I went to Fairfield. We need to continue to support education in the state of Connecticut. But it also needs to be affordable. If my stats are correct, we had 37,000 applications for 5,300 spots at UConn. It shows how great the university is. It shows what you've done for its reputation. It shows what a great education you have. But we have to keep education affordable. We need to look at a holistic approach. We need to look at education across the state. Some kids don't need a college education. For many kids, it's terrific. But when I go to small and mid-sized businesses around this state, they are dying for basic machine tools, engineering, computer graphics. We need to do more with our trade schools. We need to provide the skill sets that companies want. So we need to provide a menu of choices for people. Affordable education at the college level, continue to support it. We need to be disciplined around our spending at the college level. The costs in this state are out of control. Every university needs to be more diligent about how much they spend, and we need to use those savings to keep tuition costs down so kids can afford to go. But education be a #1 priority, and I'm going to go back to it again. The best way to pay for education is to get this economy moving. My economic plan is going to get the economy moving. He's going to continue Dan Malloy, and the economy is not going to grow under a Lamont administration. It's just not.
Thank you, Mr. Stefanowski. Mr. Lamont, you have 1 minute to rebut.
Well, maybe Bob, Oz, and I, we can go to a football game sometime when this is all over and learn to relax. I can just tell you that if education is a priority for you, and you're inheriting a $2.5 billion deficit, and you're going to cut another $11 billion out of the budget, at some point, the numbers just don't add up. I heard that from every single of your Republican candidates. They said it's a fake promise. They said the numbers don't add up. It's fantasy land. You need somebody who's going to tell you the truth. And I'm going to tell you, students, that I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that this university is affordable and CCSU is affordable, our community colleges are affordable. I'm going to work with the business community to make them, hopefully they'll pay for some more of our training expenses like Pratt & Whitney does right now for folks graduating with some of the skills they need. That's going to be a priority for me, to make sure education is affordable for each and every one of you, and you are trained for the jobs that are out there.
Thank you very much. It is now time for our rapid fire segment. Quick questions, short answers, perhaps even yes or no or one-word answers. The first question goes to Mr. Griebel. What's the biggest example of...
Say it again?
First question to you.
Yes.
You're all going to have to answer it, though. What's the biggest example of government waste in Connecticut? And your job.
I would say the lack of privatization of certain services like the ECD.
Mr. Stefanowski.
Do I have an hour to answer that question, or is this rapid fire?
Rapid fire.
Listen, the amount of money we spend on transportation for the lack of results, I would have to vote for that.
Mr. Lamont.
Healthcare costs, especially big pharma.
Emily.
Should Brett Kavanaugh be approved for the Supreme Court?
Mr. Stefanowski.
I'm going to pass on that. That's a federal issue.
Mr. Lamont.
I don't think he should be approved. And by the way, governors appoint Supreme Court justices here in the state. And you want to know where we stand on these issues. You want to know where we stand.
Mr. Griebel.
I think the women who've come forward have to be heard. I also think Judge Kavanaugh deserves a fair hearing.
Chris, for Mr. Lamont.
Is there a state agency or department we could live without or fold into another?
First thing you got to do is take all the back offices from all these different and merge them into one central thing. We have too many departments, too many divisions, too much redundancy.
Mr. Griebel.
I'll say DECD should be privatized.
Mr. Stefanowski.
The Department of Motor Vehicles, privatize it.
This question goes to Mr. Griebel. How would you grade President Trump in a letter grade, his performance?
On across the board, Dennis, and this is...
Just over the...
Yeah,
just
over the, I'd say...
one grade.
D+.
D+. Mr. Stefanowski.
I don't have a lot of the tweets, Dennis, but is economic policy lowering taxes? We could use some of that in Connecticut.
So A, B, C, D?
I'm not going to give a grade. I like his
Well,
economic
you gave him A
policy.
before. I just want to know if he still gets that.
I like his economic policy, Dennis.
Mr. Lamont.
He does not reflect Connecticut values one iota. I think he's wrong. I give him an F.
Please. Mr. Emily, next question for Mr. Lamont first.
And what grade would you give Governor Malloy?
When it comes to solving the fiscal crisis, an F.
Mr. Griebel.
I would give Governor Malloy a C+.
Mr. Stefanowski.
You got to give him an F, and Ned Lamont's going to continue the economic policy.
Chris for Mr. Griebel.
Mr. Griebel, what's the biggest mistake Governor Malloy did in office?
Could you repeat that?
What's the biggest mistake Governor Malloy made in office? Mr. Griebel first.
Governor Malloy has not brought people together. It's been kind of the my way or the highway, and that would be the answer.
Mr. Stefanowski.
The two largest tax increases in the history of Connecticut that have driven down tax revenues because people leave.
He didn't push all the way to get this fiscal crisis solved in year one.
What's the best thing Governor Malloy did? Mr. Griebel.
Second chance program.
Mr. Stefanowski.
Certainly not second chance.
One good thing he did.
Oh, boy. Can we go to Ned and come back to me?
Mr. Lamont.
I think Oz is right on criminal justice reform, and I'd also add, after Sandy Hook, I thought he was heroic.
Emily, for Mr. Stefanowski.
Would you support changing Connecticut law so a candidate could pick his or her running mate instead of being paired with the primary winner?
I think that might make sense, yes.
Mr. Lamont.
I like my running mate.
Mr. Griebel.
That's what we did. You didn't need the law changed.
Chris for Mr. Lamont.
Mr. Lamont, should there be a bear hunt?
Say it again.
Should there be a bear hunt?
A bear hunt. I have very strong feelings about that, and I would say maybe.
Mr. Griebel.
Yes, you need it, yes.
Mr. Stefanowski.
Black bear or brown bear? No, that's fine. Yes.
Mr. Griebel, should we ban plastic bags in our state like some towns have done?
That should be a goal. I don't know what the economic implications are, but yes, that should be a goal, absolutely.
Plastic straws?
Yes.
Mr. Stefanowski, should we ban plastic bags, plastic straws?
No.
Mr. Lamont.
Yes, over a period of time.
Emily, for Mr. Stefanowski.
Do you think the car tax is fair?
Well, I know Ned's putting another one on at the state level. I would leave the car tax up to the different municipalities. It should not be mandated at the state level like Ned wants to do.
Is it fair or unfair, though, in your view?
Depends on the town. It's a different rate.
Mr. Lamont.